On Thursday, May 8, 2025, President Ibrahim Traoré touched down in Moscow, a rare departure from his usual stance of staying rooted in Burkina Faso. The occasion? The 80th anniversary of Russia's Victory Day. But this wasn't just another diplomatic visit. It marked only the second time Traoré had set foot on Russian soil since the 2023 Russia-Africa Summit. This time, he was among a select group of 7 African leaders invited by President Vladimir Putin, alongside dignitaries from Egypt, Zimbabwe, and Congo. In total, 27 world leaders gathered in the Russian capital, not just to honor history, but to signal something far more current: shifting alliances in a world being redrawn. Victory Day commemorates the Soviet Union's triumph over Nazi Germany during the Great Patriotic War, Russia's chapter of World War II. The war began with a brutal Nazi invasion in June 1941 and spiraled into one of the bloodiest chapters in modern history, with over 20 million Soviet lives lost. But from the ashes of Stalingrad and the steel clash at Kursk, the Red Army surged forward, pushing the Nazis back and seizing Berlin. For Russia, it's a day of mourning, pride, and defiance. And for African leaders like Traoré, standing beside Putin on this symbolic day could mean more than paying respects. It could be the beginning of a deeper geopolitical realignment. Though the war ended 8 decades ago, its echoes still haunt the Russian soul. Victory Day is more than a celebration. It's a national ritual, a reminder of both triumph and tragedy. When Nazi Germany surrendered on May 9, 1945, the Soviet Union erupted in relief and jubilation. But it wasn't until 1965, 2 decades later, that Victory Day became an official holiday. From that point on, Red Square would roar to life with tanks, jets, and veterans draped in medals, each year a spectacle of military might and enduring pride. Yet after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the holiday faded into quiet observance. That is, until one man brought it back with force: Vladimir Putin. Under his rule, Victory Day was resurrected, not just as a tradition, but as a powerful statement of Russian identity, rooted in strength, sacrifice, and patriotism. And this year, the symbolism runs even deeper. Among the 27 world leaders standing beside Putin is a rising figure in African geopolitics, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. His presence is no surprise. Since taking power, Traoré has forged a growing alliance with Russia, one built not on interference, but on partnership. In Burkina Faso's fierce battle against terrorism and insurgency, Russia has stepped in with support, strategy, and weapons. But Moscow's reach goes beyond just one country. It now extends across the entire Sahel, where Russia has pledged arms and ammunition to the AES Confederation's Joint Task Force. This isn't just diplomacy, it's a geopolitical shift. A new world order quietly forming, with Burkina Faso and Russia at its heart. When President Traoré stepped onto Russian soil, he was greeted not as a subordinate, but as a statesman. The Russian delegation welcomed him with full honors, and at the center of it all was a handshake that spoke volumes. Vladimir Putin, a towering figure in global politics, smiled as he clasped Traoré's hand. But what stood out wasn't the handshake, it was the energy. Traoré didn't flinch, he didn't defer. Standing tall in his signature military attire, he looked Putin in the eye, not as a guest, but as an equal. It was a moment of quiet defiance, a subtle but powerful contrast to how Western leaders, especially from France, often approach African leaders with condescension or control. Here, there was mutual respect. Standing beside President Traoré, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro didn't hold back his admiration. "We are the children of the same mother, Africa. Today, we are taking a new path together." It wasn't just rhetoric. It was a declaration of unity between continents that have long stood at the margins of global power. For Maduro, this meeting was more than diplomacy. It was about building a bridge between Africa and South America, rooted in shared history and a common struggle for justice and sovereignty. And when he turned to Traoré, he didn't see just a young military leader. He saw a symbol. "We welcome Burkina Faso's fight for freedom, independence, and justice," Maduro said, with a sincerity that echoed far beyond the room. But Traoré's presence in Moscow wasn't only about parades and symbolic gestures. Behind closed doors, something far more strategic was unfolding. According to Russian authorities, while the world's cameras were focused on Red Square, President Putin had scheduled a private, high-level meeting with a very select group of African leaders after the other guests had left. Among them, the presidents of Congo, Egypt, Zimbabwe, Guinea-Bissau, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré. This wasn't a last-minute decision. Since Traoré's bold speech at the 2023 Russia-Africa Summit, he has remained on Putin's radar. And now, face-to-face in Moscow, the Russian leader was ready to talk, directly, discreetly, and with purpose. It was during the 2023 Russia-Africa Summit that the world truly began to take notice of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Over those 2 days, he didn't deliver a speech. He delivered a shockwave. Before an audience of global leaders, Traoré broke away from the usual polished diplomacy and spoke with rare fire. He opened by honoring Africa's forgotten role in the defeat of Nazism and fascism during World War II, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Soviet Union in that global fight. But what followed wasn't just a history lesson, it was a challenge. Traoré condemned the distorted narratives that erase Africa's sacrifices, calling out the selective memory of the global elite. Then came the turning point, the moment that likely etched his name into President Putin's mind. In a stunning rebuke of foreign control, Traoré addressed the room with unapologetic truth. We African heads of state have to stop behaving like puppets who dance every time the imperialists pull the strings. The hall fell silent. He went on to speak of his grassroots mobilization in Burkina Faso, where nearly 100,000 civilians had volunteered to defend their homeland, hundreds of whom had already given their lives. And with unshakable conviction, he called out the hypocrisy of those who branded these fighters as militias. Elsewhere, he said, they would have been hailed as patriots. In that moment, Traoré wasn't just speaking for Burkina Faso, he was speaking for a continent and perhaps rewriting what it means to lead. Traoré's speech didn't end with fire, it ended with a vision of African dignity, independence, and self-reliance. He turned his focus to food security, warning that no nation can claim sovereignty while its people go hungry. In a rare moment of both gratitude and challenge, he applauded President Putin's promise to send free grain to 6 African countries, following the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal. But Traoré didn't stop there. At the next forum, he declared, "We must not come here without having ensured food self-sufficiency for our peoples." Then, like the echo of a revolutionary spirit, he channeled the words of Thomas Sankara, words once spoken before the United Nations in 1984. The slave who is unable to assume his revolt does not deserve to be pitied. And then, the line that electrified social media across the continent, "Fatherland or death, we shall triumph." To millions of African youths, it wasn't just a quote, it was a call to rise. But the impact didn't stop with the youth. It resonated at the highest levels of the Kremlin. President Putin, always attentive to signs of emerging influence, saw something in Traoré. Not just a partner, but a future force in African politics. That's why, on May 10th, 2025, after the Victory Day festivities have ended and the world's eyes have turned away, President Putin will hold a private, high-stakes meeting with Traoré. According to Russian authorities and official statements from Ouagadougou, the two leaders will discuss everything from bilateral cooperation to broader multilateral strategies. And that's not all. Traoré is also set to meet with members of the Confederation of Sahel states living in Russia. Behind the handshakes and ceremonies, something deeper is taking shape, a new chapter in Africa-Russia relations, led by a man many once underestimated. President Putin's decision to hold a private one-on-one meeting with Captain Ibrahim Traoré is no mere diplomatic courtesy. It's a calculated signal, a signal that Russia sees Traoré not as a subordinate, but as an equal. It's a message to the world. Burkina Faso, and by extension the alliance of Sahel states, is becoming a pivotal player in the new global order. The leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are charting a new course. Gone are the days of economic dependence and foreign-dictated governance. Today, these nations are rewriting their destinies. Burkina Faso has moved decisively, nationalizing its natural resources and expelling Western mining giants, most notably from France. Mali, on the other hand, has struck a bold barter deal, resources in exchange for military and technical support from Russia, an agreement signed in 2023 that bypasses traditional aid models entirely. These three nations, now ruled by military governments that rose through coups between 2021 and 2022, are united by more than circumstance. They share a vision, a common purpose. They accuse the former elected regimes of being complicit in deep corruption and allowing foreign powers to exploit their lands under the guise of partnership. But now, their focus is crystal clear: reclaim sovereignty, secure their borders, and redefine leadership in West Africa. In their eyes, organizations like ECOWAS have failed to deliver true regional stability. And so, in the vacuum left behind, the AES alliance has stepped forward, with Russian backing and a mission to prove that Africa can secure itself on its own terms. In a world where global power structures are shifting fast, the Sahel is emerging as a geopolitical fault line. The alliance of Sahel states, once just a trio of military-led nations, is now attracting serious attention. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have already turned their backs on Western dominance. But now, whispers are growing louder. Chad, Senegal, and even Togo are reportedly considering an exit from ECOWAS to join this rising bloc. The reasons are clear. While the region still faces the brutal grip of terrorism and extremist violence, these states are prioritizing something long denied: political sovereignty and territorial self-determination. The battlefield is no longer just physical, it's ideological. Russia's growing partnership with the Sahelian alliance is transforming into something much bigger than military cooperation. It's becoming a pivot point in Africa's foreign policy realignment. For decades, these French-speaking nations were tethered to the legacy of colonial influence. Now they're rewriting the rules. Through strategic agreements with Moscow, they are bartering what they have: natural resources, for what they urgently need: advanced military equipment, training, and tactical intelligence. These deals aren't charity. They are transactions of survival. In this recalibration, Russia isn't just a partner. It's becoming the arsenal behind Africa's resistance. And as the world watches, one thing becomes increasingly clear: the Sahel is no longer waiting to be saved. It's preparing to defend itself. What's unfolding in the Sahel is more than a shift. It's a transformation. Sahelian leaders have welcomed Russia's support not just with open hands, but with open eyes. They recognize what's at stake. For the first time in decades, a global power is treating them not as pawns, but as partners. Russia has not only provided humanitarian aid, but also ignited political consciousness and economic opportunity across the region. Bilateral agreements have begun to pave new roads, literally and figuratively, aimed at accelerating trade, industrial growth, and strategic investment. In return, African leaders are doing more than just receiving support. They're actively analyzing and safeguarding these alliances, watching closely for any external threats that could undermine this new chapter. Because for them, Russia isn't just an ally, it's a reliable cornerstone in their pursuit of sovereignty. A striking example is Burkina Faso's bold step into nuclear energy. During the 2023 Russia-Africa Summit, it signed a memorandum of understanding with Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear corporation, planting the seeds for energy independence. But Burkina Faso isn't alone. Russia is working hand in hand with Mali and Niger to tap into their vast natural resources, not for export exploitation, but for development within. The agreements stretch far beyond economics. Russia has committed to building critical infrastructure and has already deployed military personnel to help stabilize the region. In a world where aid often comes with strings attached, this partnership stands out: pragmatic, strategic, and reshaping the very foundations of African self-reliance. But Traoré is not the only African leader on President Putin's radar. The Victory Day celebrations in Moscow served as more than a military showcase. They were a gathering of future allies. Russia has been steadily deepening ties with a growing list of African nations, including Egypt, Zimbabwe, Congo, and the Central African Republic. In the car, President Faustin Archange Touadera has become one of Russia's closest partners on the continent. Reports estimate that over 2,500 Russian instructors are now active in the country. But it's not just boots on the ground. Russia is building highways, restoring schools, and tapping into the nation's rich mineral reserves, not just for profit, but to elevate the living conditions of over 5.6 million citizens. It's a model of cooperation that challenges the exploitative legacy left behind by former colonial powers. Egypt and Ethiopia represent yet another axis of this evolving alliance. Their relationship with Moscow has moved far beyond traditional diplomacy, anchored now in the powerful multilateral bloc known as BRICS. Together with Russia, they stand at the helm of a rising coalition of emerging economies, reshaping not just regional dynamics, but the very structure of global power. Their presence in Moscow on May 9th wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. It marked a shared vision of a post-Western world order, where sovereignty is reclaimed and development is no longer dictated by the global north. Russia, Egypt, and Ethiopia, each with their own ambitions, are aligning under a common cause: to end the monopoly of Western hegemony and carve out a new era of geopolitical balance. And as history continues to unfold, the question is no longer if this shift will happen, but how far it will go. Russia's African outreach has not stopped at the major players. In Guinea-Bissau, a smaller nation with immense untapped potential, Moscow has moved strategically. Both countries have inked agreements across trade, military technical cooperation, and broader economic development. But what's more telling is the infrastructure Russia is helping to build, not just in roads or ports, but in governance itself. Specialized working groups have been created to identify, design, and implement national development programs tailored to Guinea-Bissau's future. According to President Putin, Russian companies are increasingly interested in entering the Guinea-Bissauan market, and this is no recent connection. Over 70% of the country's military personnel and civilian administrators were trained in the Soviet Union, and now, under Russia, that legacy continues. For the 2025/26 academic year, Russia has increased its education quota, offering more scholarships for young Guinea-Bissauans to study in Russian universities, seeding a new generation of leaders aligned with Moscow. Over the decades, African leaders have consistently stressed the importance of teaching the continent's youth the truth, especially when it comes to history. While Western powers often rewrite or whitewash their colonial pasts, one fact remains undeniable. The Soviet Union never colonized Africa. Instead, it stood shoulder to shoulder with African liberation movements, offering support, not chains. In today's shifting geopolitical landscape, that legacy matters more than ever. Africa now faces modern forms of neo-colonialism, economic manipulation, military dependency, and media distortion. And in that fight, Russia's relationship with Africa isn't built on domination, but on solidarity. It's from this foundation that a stronger, more comprehensive partnership continues to grow. In honoring the 80th anniversary of the Soviet victory over fascism, Russia extended that recognition to a select group of African nations: Burkina Faso, Congo, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Ethiopia, Guinea-Bissau, and Zimbabwe, welcoming them as equals, not subordinates. It was a clear message that the path forward is one of mutual respect, shared struggle, and collective power. Russia has repeatedly voiced its intention to support Africa's economic recovery and help prevent the conditions that breed future wars. And as the continent inches closer to forging a true Pan-African identity, Russia stands ready to walk alongside. Both share a mutual need to build a multipolar world where no region, no people, and no voice is silenced by empire. The road ahead may be long, but for nations like Burkina Faso, the journey has already begun. The future is no longer about East or West. It's about who dares to rise. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.